Welcome to the EchoCast, episode 141, Mass Effects and Leaks. This is a podcast about gaming, all kinds of games, especially this one, but especially The Division and its franchise, some speculation, news, and updates about that and everything else that I feel like talking about. I am Bon Diesel. I do mostly Division stuff, at least I used to, and we'll talk a bit about that. And Twitch streams and YouTube videos, that's a more of an upcoming thing. Please take a moment to subscribe and to rate the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on. This episode will cover some of the Heartland leaks and talking about that situation and not specifically the leaks, and then probably a whole lot of discussion about Mass Effect. Then we'll do some content updates, and that will be it. I do want to thank this month's Patreon supporters: Hassan, Christian, Darren, Tim, PK, Manmade, Golf, and Lunchbox. If you'd like to support this podcast and my other content, please check out patreon.com/BonDiesel. Okay, so with Division, so I'm not going to talk about details of the Heartland leaks. The Division Heartland is a free-to-play game that is coming to most platforms. I think by the end of the year is what their kind of public timeline said. As would be expected, this happens with most games that go into testing with a large number of people. Some leaks came out, and it's not surprising or even really like upsetting or anything when some YouTube account with 6 followers posts some stuff and it gets spread around a little bit. There is some moral ambiguity about covering those leaks as a larger creator. This has happened a few times with The Division, and it's happened, with every game that's probably ever come out. But there's this attitude of, or there's this phenomena, I'll sarcastically call it, of someone signs an NDA, plays some type of test of a game that's coming out, and then their friend will post about it, quote unquote friend. Sometimes, it's convenient. And there's this conundrum there, right? Where if I didn't sign an NDA, then I can talk about it. And I assume that's true. I assume that there's no legal repercussions of, and I guess there's a chance that if like an Ubisoft or another company really wanted to pursue it, they could attempt to investigate you to find out who gave you the information, to then execute the things in the NDA against the person who actually did release the information. I've never actually heard of that happening. The only companies I've ever really seen get really serious about that stuff have been like Nintendo and stuff like that. And I don't even know if it's NDAs with them necessarily, but more just agreements that they seem to be the most litigious. So like the stuff with Heartland, at the end of the day, it'll be forgotten once the game actually comes out and things like that. My issue with it is just, and this is just a gaming issue. I made some comments about how shitty it is to advertise the leaks, to reference them directly. By some people, it was seen as hypocritical because me referencing the leaks, even not referencing where you could find them, what game they were even for, even though if you're part of my audience, that's fairly obvious. I understand that. I understand the perceived hypocrisy. I also think that the people who think I was being hypocritical um, have a history or tendency to uh, look at anything I say or do in a negative light. So I can be self-aware enough to know to kind of understand the hypocrisy a little bit, but I can also be self-aware enough to know that uh, the people alleging that or painting it that way um, never really give me the benefit of the doubt in the first place. So it's not exactly the most reliable source of introspection or self-evaluation. Um, I mean, at the end of the day, there's not very many, if any, division creators at this point who are real prolific, who are doing like really deep, interesting takes. And it's maybe not their fault entirely. But the division always has been kind of a hotbed for uh, like vendor reset videos, build videos that are all basically the same build with like one different thing and some stupid name and a thumbnail, or criticism videos that meander and go on for exactly 10 minutes and 1 second. And it's not been since probably the Division 1 where there were some people making some really creative content or doing some really interesting things that, I mean, I can't honestly tell you I've consumed Division 2 YouTube content, or even Twitch for that matter, in literally years, because there's just, and this includes me, there's no one really doing anything that's like new or creative or really that interesting, in my opinion. And what you see is, the all capitals thumbnail with the surprised face, or a stolen screenshot that someone took as the background of the thumbnail. It's just I just think that this Heartland thing was just another example of an issue that this community's had for a long time. And I think gaming communities in general, I don't think it's a division exclusive issue. It just so happens that I'm more embedded in the division community than I am other ones. So yeah, so I mean, my whole take on it was basically this is just shitty, and that this sucks. And there was some allegation that me commenting on leaks in general was a bigger issue than the people who were posting links and directly referencing Heartland Leaks and stuff like that. I would, I guess, in a very biased way, disagree, but to each their own. Some of the fallout from that, just some clarifications on my side. I don't, and I still don't block people simply because I disagree with them. There's some situations where I've tried to give some people chances over and over again, to not, to grow up, and I'm good now. So if I unblock someone more than once, I'm giving people a chance, and they keep throwing that away, then that's fine. It's I've decided that my social media is my own little happy space, and while I try to retain people who will disagree with me on things, who I respect, I'm not going to do so with people who have antagonized me and insulted me for years. I don't have time for that. My mental health isn't worth it. So we'll move on from that. I do need some personal growth. I do need to be better about deciding whether to engage in things or not. Someone reached out to me who I do respect quite a bit, and kind of pointed out an idea to me of just like deciding whether every tweet or every post on Reddit or whatever is really adding to a conversation, or if it's just stoking a fire. And that's a fair thing to say. I quote unquote built my brand, 5 years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago, on the idea of a lot or most of the loudest voices in the Division community were extremely sensational or highly toxic or awful. And I wanted to be a more level-headed voice in the community who represented not the 3 or 4% of players with the most hours than like everyone by a long shot. I always felt like I wanted to represent the 50% in the middle, the people who can only play a couple hours a week or who can play more than that, but maybe play solo on everything. And I've always seen that as like the majority of the player base. And I've always wanted to kind of speak for that part of the player base, even though, especially in the first game, I wasn't really part of it. I played thousands of hours of Division 1, and I've still played a pretty good chunk of 600-700 hours of 2. And but there is some burnout that happens, right? I haven't played Division consistently since the Fail Out mission. I've been exploring other things, and it's been great for me. If I have to be totally honest, it's been very healthy for me, and I've gotten to experience a lot of things I wouldn't have if I was just locked on the Division only. And I think that on all sides of this, you're seeing people with a lot of burnout. Now, my method of dealing with that burnout is to just wipe my hands of Division for a while and come back when there's something new to talk about or play. It seems like some other people's method is to just keep grinding and keep digging and keep getting frustrated. That's a to each their own thing. I don't personally think it's healthy, and I think it leads to a lot of the negativity. When you see any post that Division makes or any of the devs make, and you see an instant, the first comment is always something awful. I would suggest people spread their wings a bit. I'm also not going to let myself get run over. My whole calm, cool, collected thing for a long time, I've thrown that out for a while because I think sometimes you shouldn't always be calm, cool, and collected. I think it's okay to stand up for yourself sometimes. I also think it's smart to pick your battles, right? The reality for me is that I'm probably never going to get back to making content the way I wanted to at one point, for multiple reasons. I have a kid now. I'm in my 30s now. I have other responsibilities and other things, other priorities like my child and my wife, and my job and my family and my friends, especially after the last year-ish of COVID. There's also that realization that for me, and I'm happy to hear others' opinions on this, but I think that there has to be a realization at some point that all those dreams and ambitions and hopes that everyone always had for the Division, that it was going to be something more than what Division 1 was or Division 2 was. While I would argue they're both excellent games, they haven't really lived up to what everyone always wanted them to be, right? I would be willing to bet that even if you talk to some devs who have worked on the games, that the IP has never reached the level that it could have or should have or whatever. And so there is a realization of the Division's never going to be Destiny. If it's going to keep going for the looter thing, it's never going to be Destiny. I think we've figured that out. If they try to go a different direction, which I'm going to talk a bit about with Mass Effect, maybe at some point they'll do a bigger thing. But I think there's a realization, maybe a little bit of a depression about how, this thing that we had so much hope for, and that we have, dedicated time to and emotional, well-being or whatever, that it's just never maybe going to fully fulfill what we hoped it would. And that can be said for lots of things in life, but we'll stick to Division here. So there's a definitely an apathy that's come from me of, well, I'm never going to be able to really get in, to the way it was a couple of years ago, or to the way that I or other people always wanted. So I guess F it, and I'll just be a dick. I want to get away from that attitude a bit more, but it definitely comes from. I mean, it's a big combination of burnout and apathy, and I think the last year plus of COVID and things like that have definitely worn on myself, and I'm sure others as well. So I suspect that a lot of this nastiness that happens is some conscious and subconscious decisions and context on my side and others, and probably just a bunch of people coming to terms with the reality of our love for this game and this franchise. I still really like Division. I still highly anticipate what Heartland is going to be. I highly anticipate the movie and the book and whatever content is coming for Division 2. I'll play it all, and I'll read it all, and I'll consume it all. And I still hope there's a Division 3 one day. I truly hope it's a borderline reboot. I truly hope they're willing to consider doing something completely new and different with the franchise to reinvigorate it or take it a different direction. Do I think that's actually going to happen? I don't. I think Division 3 will probably resemble 2 much more than anything else, but with some new stuff and hopefully some cool ideas. And I also don't think that's going to happen for 3 or 4 years. So yeah, we'll talk about that, I guess, hopefully one day when that happens. So yeah, so Heartland Leaks suck. They show content in a condition that wasn't meant to be judged. It was meant to be tested, and leaks suck. And if you spread them, I think you kind of suck, but that's okay. My opinion doesn't matter that much. Okay, so moving on from the Division stuff. So Mass Effect. So Mass Effect Legendary Edition came out a little bit more than a week ago. I'm recording this on Saturday, the 22nd. The Legendary Edition came out on the 14th. So my history with Mass Effect is actually, I've never played it before Legendary Edition came out. Mass Effect was a game that I started, I actually, if I remember correctly, in college, I worked at GameStop. I think towards the end of my freshman year until a little bit after I graduated college. So like 3.5 years, I would say. And what's so funny is, if I remember correctly, my very first midnight launch that I worked was Mass Effect 1 was the first one. So in hindsight, what's the thing about me is that 19-year-old Von Diesel played basically Call of Duty and Madden and NCAA football, and that was about it. I didn't care about story. I didn't care about all of those things. Mass Effect wasn't even on my radar. I remember, I remember putting boxes out on the used shelf of Mass Effect games. I remember, people talking about it and going nuts over it, and buying the used copies as soon as they would come in and stuff. Like, it's so funny that there was this moment for that game, for that franchise. The first one came out, and then I don't know if the second one came out while I was still working or not. I think it did. And I know I was gone by the third one. The third one was when I was after I graduated. And I just completely whiffed. And what's interesting is that, I already said I was a COD gamer. I was a Madden guy. I was very simplistic in my video game preferences. Not very deep. It was pretty shallow. And the first game I think that ever really got me into it was the first Red Dead. So not like the first Red Dead. I'm talking about, Red Dead and then Red Dead Redemption. So the first Red Dead, I actually had a PlayStation 3 at the time. Most people would know me as an Xbox gamer, and I have been in college, and then I briefly had a PS3 for a while, and then I went back to the Xbox One when those came out. And I played Red Dead, and I remember This shouldn't be spoilers at this point. Red Dead's been out for so long, but there is a scene in Red Dead. I want to say it's around halfway through, where you're returning home for the first time. So if I can't remember the Red Dead story perfectly, but long story short, these federal police or these private police, I forget, basically have your child and your wife held hostage, and they're making you do stuff for them out in this West territory, before you can get them back. Red Dead Redemption is a prequel and explains everything that happens leading up to that. But the first Red Dead game, there's just this moment where you're riding your horse, and your wife and the kid are back at your homestead, and you're going, and there's a song that's playing, and it's just perfect for the moment, and there's this big emotional lead up, and it was one of the first times I remember like my heart being in a game, right? Red Dead Redemption 2 did the same thing. Hit for me big time. I really, really enjoyed the main character there, and a lot of the relationships built and things like that. And there's been, more than a handful of games that I've experienced, some really deep emotions with and enjoyed. So basically, when in 2007, I wasn't emotionally ready to be a Mass Effect fan. And for years and years since then, I've had multiple people, both in the Division community and even like one of the guys I work with just a few months ago was like, oh gosh, it was probably a year and a half ago now, was like really saying like, dude, you really need to play those games. I think you'd really like them because they're his favorite games ever, the Mass Effect series trilogy. And he was even like an Andromeda stan. He was like, I remember when that came out and I was giving him shit about it. And I'll kind of explain, my new understanding of that here in a moment. But so, a few months ago, I saw that the Legendary Edition was coming. I had considered going back and playing Mass Effect 1 through 3. But when I saw just how dated, especially 1, but even 2 and even 3, because 3's 9 years old at this point, they were just, I couldn't do it. I knew it would hurt my impression of the games to have to play games that look and feel that old. So I didn't. But then Legendary Edition got announced a few months ago, and I got like super pumped. I genuinely was excited. Like, okay, there's like, it's like if like all your friends are Star Wars fans or Star Trek fans or whatever series of choice, Lord of the Rings or whatever, and you're the only one who isn't into it, but you are curious, and that's how I've always been with Mass Effect. So then the Legendary Edition came out last week, and long story short, which it won't be short, I'll be talking about all 3 of them pretty in depth. I finished all 3 of them in the last week. And I kind of blew through them. I definitely blew through 1. It still feels pretty dated. But I'll talk more about that. I took a lot more time in 2 and even more time in 3. So even though I beat them all 3 in 1 week, it said I still played Mass Effect 3 for 41 hours. So I don't even know how that works because I've regrettably been staying up really late. The wife, normally goes to bed around 8 or 9, sometimes a little bit later. The babe goes down around 7 or 8. So that normally gives me like 3 or 4 hours. Well, it should only give me 3 or 4 hours a night. I've been staying up a little bit later and getting 4 or 5 hours a night. So it adds up, I guess, over a whole week. But my overall impression of Mass Effect as a trilogy I think it's my favorite IP now, which I didn't expect. I knew I was sure I would like it. I was sure I would enjoy it. If I have to be clear about, before I played this, my favorite IP was Red Dead, 100%. And the thing for me is it went Red Dead, and then there was a big gap, and then games like Division and some other games that I do care about, but I'm not like super into. I am super into Red Dead games. Anyone who's ever seen me kind of stand for them will have seen that, I think. I don't care if you couldn't figure out the controls of Red Dead 2. I don't care if you don't like the gunplay and all that. It's a freaking ridiculously good game. Because for me, it's the fact that it's what Red Dead does emotionally. It's not really about the gameplay. It's about the characters and the emotions and the story for me with those type of games. And until I played Mass Effect, I just personally had never played games other than Red Dead that I thought really did it that well. And then I played Mass Effect, and now so the thing is I don't think any of the 3 games of Mass Effect are necessarily more fun to play from a gameplay perspective than Red Dead or even Division or, other games I enjoy. Like, if you only look at the gameplay and if you just look at the moment to moment experience of a game like Mass Effect, it doesn't really beat other games that I like in that moment. But what it does do is, over the course of 3 games and over 100 hours of gameplay, make you care about characters. I'll talk about the way I did my relationships and stuff in my first Mass Effect run. But what I always look for from a story game, which is something I'm way more interested in these days, from the previous topic about Division and stuff, is I think I'm kind of just burning out from that type of game. I think I'm kind of just burning out from the open world looter shooter games as a service, no real discernible organized story. I'm kind of over it, and playing Mass Effect has finally kind of made me realize that. Still like Division, still want to cover Division, still can't wait to see more Division. But not just Division, but playing through the Mass Effect original trilogy, I think a lot of single player games are ruined for me now. And now I understand why people hold those games to such a high caliber. Now I see why people who are BioWare fans were so disappointed with Anthem, big time. Andromeda as well. I'll talk about Andromeda though, because I've actually started playing it, but we'll get there. There's a lot to talk about. I was always a big Fallout fan. I started with Fallout 3, then New Vegas, and then 4. I've never gotten into 76. I'm good. Because that's literally going to that, like Fallout 76 is like the epitome of what I don't like about where gaming is going from where it started. I don't think 76 is as good as 3 or New Vegas or 4. And I thought those games were like the pinnacle of this like storytelling, choice-based things and stuff like that. And now I, play Mass Effect and I'm like, oh my God, like I still like Fallout. But Mass Effect, I remember multiple times thinking like, oh, so this is like if Mass Effect, or this is like if Fallout had like somewhat, had like better graphics and better storytelling and actual relationships and stuff. Oh, okay. So this is actually the best of this. And again, this is all just my opinion. And it definitely took me from like Fallout for me isn't up there with like Red Dead, but it's definitely up there with Division and things like that, from my personal preference scale. And just this Mass Effect, this experience, it was like heartbreaking. It was really fun. What was so interesting about the Mass Effect series for me, playing 1, 2, and 3 in a week, was it got me to care about characters that are fake, that aren't real people, obviously, but it feels like it, especially in the moment. And it got me to care about a story, and it informed me on a world that doesn't exist, but it builds it so well, and it makes it feel so lived in and so interesting and deep. Here's the breakdown for any Mass Effect fans who are listening. So Mass Effect 1, I was Paragon the whole time. There's a Paragon and Renegade system where it's good and bad, basically. And so through the whole series, you make choices that are one way or the other. My choices were like 95% Paragon, which is the good guy side. The Renegade choice actually, by the end of the series, if you go into the Renegade side of things more often, your character's appearance changes, and they've done that in other games as well. but like your eyes start to glow, and you've got this like all your character through some story stuff becomes very integrated with technology, and like you'll see like the seams of the tech like in his face and stuff, but then that stuff goes away if you're a good guy. It's kind of it's cool. It's the old Knights of the Old Republic and stuff like that, I believe, did that, which was also BioWare. And so in Mass Effect 1, I was a male shep. I did the default shep character because that's what I've always seen in all the gifs and stuff like that. So I know you can make your own character, but all the ones I've seen made just don't look right. So I went with regular shep dude. The romance in the first one was Liara, who ends up being, I would say, the second biggest character in the whole series. In Mass Effect 2 and 3, I stayed with the Paragon. I switched the romance to Tali, and at the end I did the destroy ending. So for people who have played the game, they know what that means. I won't spoil that. Maybe I'll talk about that in another podcast about my feelings about the ending of 3 in the whole series. What I will say about it is I liked it. So if you don't know the history of Mass Effect, when Mass Effect 3 released in 2012, the original ending people really didn't like. I actually don't know what it is. I haven't looked deep enough into it. So they released the DLC that basically expanded the ending, and I think gave you some new options to pick for the ending, depending on how you'd played the previous 3 games. And the ending I did, which I researched a little, feels like the canon ending. And actually, there was a Mass Effect 4 trailer that came out at the end of 2020 that I think kind of confirms my suspicions, but we can speculate about that here in a moment. So, okay, so let's break down each game. So Mass Effect 1, it came out in 2007. It's very dated. So this Legendary Edition updated the graphics a bunch on all 3 games, but especially Mass Effect 1. If you go back and look at footage of Mass Effect 1, I mean, it's a 14-year-old game. It was all 3. What's wild is when you play this game, especially when you hit 2 and 3, it's unbelievable that these were all 360 games or PS3. Mass Effect 2 and 3 were on PS3. Mass Effect 1 was exclusive to Xbox, but then they did a trilogy edition that had all 3 games included, and that brought Mass Effect 1 to the PlayStation 3. So eventually they got all of them. All platforms did. And Mass Effect 1 was really slow to me in like the first half, and I really enjoyed the second half. It really picks up. The pacing's pretty bad in the first one. It gets better in the second and third one. It's never perfect, the pacing of the story, but that also comes down to you. You kind of get to decide if you're just going to mainline right through the main story or if you're going to do all the side stuff, which I'll talk about. But Mass Effect 1 was interesting because it's the only one where they tried to do, well, until Andromeda, they tried to do like kind of an open worldy thing. And it's still real bad. It's awful. It's Mass Effect 1. I want to say it has maybe on the main story 2 or 3, maybe 4 sections that you have to drive this thing called a Mako. It's a big world explorer 6-wheeled truck thing, or 6 or 8, I can't remember. And it's garbage. It's so bad. It's the worst part of Mass Effect 1 in my opinion. It looks awful. It doesn't play well. Apparently the controls were so bad in the original game that they updated them big time for this Legendary Edition. And if these are the updated controls, I can't even imagine how bad the original ones were, because it's a nightmare. It's awful. But that's like the only thing I didn't like. The thing that's consistent through all 3 games is, the conversations, the interactions. There's always a little bit of humor, but it also takes itself very seriously. And even though it's this big sci-fi world with aliens and all in time travel, not time travel, but like light speed travel to places, the big thing I like about it so much, and if you pay attention to the games I enjoy, is even though it's a sci-fi game, it's so grounded and it feels so real, and the interactions between people feel so real. If you listen to the podcast or pay attention to my social media, you'll know that last year I got really into a game called Haven, which was this little indie game made by the Game Bakers, from there in France. And Haven, as an actual game, the gameplay is just okay. It's not really that. Even a little rough, you could say. It's a little different and it's fun, but the gameplay is just okay. No one, at least I wouldn't play that game just for the gameplay. But the relationship that you stumble upon and you experience when you play that game between the two main characters was one of my favorite relationships I've ever seen depicted on screen or in media. And that happens times 100 with Mass Effect. At least for me, it did. Now, if you're the type of person that can't kind of let yourself get lost in a story and kind of get into it and put yourself in, like for me, like I felt like I was playing a ship, and so when you make these relationships, when you are mean to people, when you are nice to people, when you try to have a relationship with someone in the game, if you can't really get into it, it's not gonna mean as much to you. But if you can, it's, in my opinion, unrivaled. Playing through these 3 games made me realize why people were so mad about Cyberpunk, because I think people were really hoping that Cyberpunk was going to be, I'm not really a Witcher 3 fan, but I recognize its greatness. I think people thought that, Cyberpunk was going to be like a Mass Effect experience or a Witcher 3 experience. And yeah, just the relationships you start building in one, it doesn't do a great job of fleshing everything out. It's a 14-year-old game and it feels like one, but it still feels pretty good. And especially the last third of Mass Effect 1, the gameplay feels good, the story's moving, you're making choices that matter all through all 3 games, you're discovering things, there's twists, there's characters that are introduced that are really fun. It's great. And what's interesting is that Mass Effect 1, so even the Legendary Edition had a lot of RPG elements removed, but I still really liked what was left. It lets you build all the characters in very specific ways. There's a lot of loot in Mass Effect 1, so you're picking up attachments for guns and different levels of guns and different types of guns and weapons and armor, and the armor is specific to the type of alien or the type of being. So human armor won't fit on a Talarian or won't fit on a Solarian or a Krogan. It's really cool, and I really love that system. And what happened in 2 and 3 is in 2 they removed almost all of it, and then 3 they like kind of half-assed added some of it back, but it was never as deep as it was in 1. What's so interesting about all 3 of these games is that they each do things better than the other ones, and they each do things worse. And what's so interesting is that you would assume in 3 they would take what people liked about 1 and then liked about 2, and then vice versa as well, and make like the perfect game in 3. And they like almost tried. They almost got there, but they just didn't quite go far enough. And there's things in 3, there's things I like about 2 more than 3. So what's really funny is if you play through this series, I think most people will have a similar experience to me, where you'll play the first one and you'll be like, that's kind of annoying. And then you'll play the second one and you'll be like, oh, they fixed that, but now they did that. Why is it like that? It's anyone who's played all 3, I think will know what I'm talking about. But Mass Effect 1 was great. Now, here's the thing. I plan on playing through this trilogy multiple times eventually. Now I understand why there's so many people who I know or have interacted with who it's like a yearly ritual that they play through all 3 of these games, even before the Legendary Edition, which blew my mind until now I've played it. Now I get it. I'll probably never play through 1 again. I'm happy with what I did in 1. I'm happy with the choices I made and where I was at. And I just don't really know if I want to go through that again. I definitely want to play 2 and 3 again, because Mass Effect 2, there's a huge leap. You can definitely tell. I believe Mass Effect 2 was 2010 and Mass Effect 3 was 2012. And there's such a huge leap between 1 and 2 of 2 still feels like an 11-year-old game. But it feels way less like 1. And in general, all three of these games, the story really carries it, obviously, but two feels, in my opinion, way more playable. Where one, you were kind of like, okay, I'll ignore these super janky cover system and all this super janky stuff to just enjoy what this game is. Where two still has some of that, but it's not nearly as noticeable. It's not nearly as bad. And the story of two is just wild. It's so good, especially the end. It's just like so good, and it still definitely had some downsides. The really simplistic way that they handle armor and weapons and upgrades and all of that stuff in two felt very cheap compared to one, and it doesn't feel good because you don't feel like, at least I didn't feel like I could customize my ship as much as I wanted to, or even my the people I was in there with. But two is where they allow you to get a lot deeper with all of your crew and the people you're discovering. And two introduces loyalty missions. So you find these people that become part of your crew, and all culminates to this mission at the end where, based on the choices you've made, people in your crew die or they don't. And then that affects the third game a whole bunch. It's a big deal. And then two is when they introduce the ability to start a romance between Shep and Tali, which is what I went with two and three. The Tali character for me is personal because it reminds me a lot of my wife. They have oddly similar personalities. My wife's tall, skinny lady too, so then maybe that's part of it. But that really, I think one, I was like, this is a really cool game. Two is like, holy crap, this might be my favorite game. Like now I might be in, and three kind of solidified that. Two is just such a big leap, and it's so good. I'm really trying to do a lot of this without completely spoiling. This game is kind of weird because you can only spoil it so much because each person's playthrough can be so different. But two is just so cool, and while there are annoying things that happened that they definitely tried to simplify it way too much, my guess is that they got a bunch of feedback from one that it was too complicated, and that, regular pod gamers like myself at the time didn't want to have to do all of that micromanaging. Two maybe pulled it back a little too far. But like, just the twist and the relationships, and especially those loyalty missions for a lot of the individuals, are so fun. And I even know in hindsight, I missed some missions that are really big and that are really exciting or impactful. There's a mission, there's a DLC called the Overlord DLC, I believe, that tells like this really heart-wrenching story that I didn't play. And I fully intend to next time I play two. But like, what's so cool about two, especially after finishing three, is that two kind of almost unwittingly gets you to really care about every single character. And the end of two really puts that to the test. Now, I used a guide. So if you haven't played it before, there's essentially what it's called the suicide mission at the end. And you have to make very specific choices and do very specific things and put people in very specific roles in the last quarter of the game to ensure that everyone lives on your crew, or at least the people who you really care about live. And for me at the time, like my favorite characters in this universe I like Shep because he's the main character, or her if that's what you go with. But it's Garrus and Tali. We're like one about halfway through two. I was like, Tali and Garrus are gonna live through this whole series no matter what. That is my dedication. Garrus is this big alien character that he's just so cool, and basically got to the point where I assume that on 90% of my missions, those were my two compatriots. You can pick two squad members at any given time. And two kind of unwillingly really reinforces that, which then leads to three. So the ending of two is super, super cool. I did what's quote unquote the best ending where everyone lived, because I'm a pansy. I couldn't watch anyone die. And then that moves into three. And what's interesting about three is that three got panned a lot when it came out. I remember this. What actually happened was, I think it was when the trilogy edition came out, I remember people talking about 3 and then how they did a extended cut DLC to try to make people a little bit happier with the ending. And I remember years ago now being like, what's that all about? And so what's funny is I actually dove deep in YouTube videos and all this stuff and learned about all the lore of Mass Effect and learned about the story and why people didn't like the original ending and what the extended cut did. And I remember, I mean, it was 5-6 years ago now that I like dove headfirst and was like, and I even remember then being like, oh, that seems kind of cool, but there's no way I'm going to spend all that time playing that game. At the time, I was very busy. And what's funny is in hindsight, I forgot basically all of it. Playing through this trilogy, I was a little worried. I was like, man, I'm going to remember a bunch of that stuff from when I like went down that rabbit hole 5 years ago. And I definitely didn't. I forgot basically everything. So the Mass Effect 3, from a gameplay feel, it's definitely the most modern feeling, of course. I know they did some enhancements with all 3 games with the Legendary Edition to make it feel more modern. I suspect 3 probably didn't get very much attention because it felt pretty good. The cover system still is a little rough, but works a lot better. There's vaulting. There's they really love this jump mechanic where you sprint towards an edge, and if it's an edge that has a somewhere where you can jump, it has this quick little cinematic where you jump over. It's so funny. I'm sure it's like a loading thing. But Mass Effect 3 is just, in my opinion, such a good wrap up of the series. And this comes as someone who didn't wait years for these games to come out, who, didn't experience 3 when it first came out. People were unhappy with it. And some people still are, from what I've read. Like, I can tell that people still feel a little salty about the way that 3 ends, or however you choose for it to end. But it was so good, and there's just so many moments that it calls back to the first and second game so much. The decisions that you made in those 2 games, there's a few that they kind of copped out on that I've noticed or read about, but for the most part, like there's so much callback to the first 2 games, and so much of what you did then matters a lot. The relationships that you make, whether you choose the Tali character is interesting because I was reading about how at one point they weren't even going to have her be like part of your crew. She was just going to be a character that shows up and goes away. But the big thing in Mass Effect for the characters are their arcs. And so many of the characters, the way you meet them, if you pay attention to them and if you make relationships with them, they grow so much. And this Tali character starts off as basically this like almost like adolescent acting person, or alien, I guess. And then by the end is like an ambassador for her species and is this like deeply entwined person into your main character's life and a bunch of others. And without spoiling things, there's multiple lines, especially in the last third of Mass Effect 3. I assume it's like this with anyone that you're in a relationship with in the game, but there's this sense of like innocence and sincerity that they wrote this Tali character with, where there's multiple things she says. If you've paid attention to my social media, it's basically become like a Tali simp Twitter feed. But there's this line at the very end of the game, in a situation that's rough, where that character says to you, I have a home and come back to me. And if you ever play it, if you hit that moment, if you romance Tali and you hit the end and that moment happens, I mean, I don't tear out very often for games and even just thinking about games, but what they did, it was in 1 and especially 2 and in 3, is they built these relationships so organically and so sincerely that when that moment hits, like, it's genuinely emotional. And you want them all to live, and you want this to work out good, and you want to make the choices that, even though these aren't real characters, this is a story that was told 9 years ago now. Like, so for someone like me who never got into it back then, like, it was like I was like all in, like, I will come back, and the fact that any game can do that for anyone. So even if Mass Effect isn't your jam, but if you've had that feeling about any game or movie or book or TV show, it's just so cool that you can, especially in crazy times like we've had for the last couple of years, to be able to just kind of disconnect a little bit and just really entrench yourself and care about a thing that you don't have to care about. That's the thing about this story. I could have just played through this game and knocked out all the missions and been like, I'll see if you make a certain choice, this Tally character who I came to love will just kill herself if you make the wrong choices at one point in the game. Like, and when I heard about that, I like literally like clenched in my stomach. I was like, oh God, like I have to make sure that doesn't happen, and this was, I've had other games hit me emotionally. Hellblade, Haven, oh man, Titanfall 2. Like I've had, there's tons of games that are very emotional, but what to me has been unique about Mass Effect and playing through the trilogy is the way that it builds and then the way it culminates at the end is unique for me. Now, I've heard people say that games like Dragon Age, also made by BioWare, Witcher 3, what you'll find is that if a game, it takes place in like a medieval-y time, I just can't get into it. I don't like swords and arrows and all that stuff. I've never gotten into it. So I've seen multiple people say like, hey, you should try out Dragon Age. If anything, it actually feels even a little bit more real. I just can't. I tried to play Inquisition, which I know is not one of the more heralded games in the series. It's the earlier ones people like the most. It's kind of an Andromeda situation with Mass Effect. That's it. Like, I know The Witcher 3 is an amazing game. I can't get into it. I've tried like 5 times. Can't do it. So yeah. So I finished 3. 3 tried to reintroduce some of the RPG elements from the earlier games, from 1 especially. It did it kind of half-assedly. It's good. You can customize your character a lot. There's some very different play styles you can go for. I went for very basic soldier class. You can pick classes, so you can almost have, if you're a Division fan, you can almost have a main character that plays almost like a Division agent, and especially by 3, using skills and things like that. But nope, I was a grunt. I just used a rocket, and it's called a concussion shot, and my gun and grenades like that, and incendiary ammo. You can pick ammo types for your guns. And I played super basic build. I played very COD gamer Mass Effect run. I plan to change that when I subsequently play more in the future, but I kind of stuck with that. My Shep was a grunt. And when 3 ended, I picked an ending. In 3, you have to essentially do all these missions to bring together the whole galaxy to fight this existential threat. And that's tracked with a number. So the number of people you bring onto your cause will change the endings and the way that the ending happens. And it's super cool. It's also impacted by choices you make in 1 and 2. And what actually ended up happening was I was going for a very specific ending with Tally as the relationship, and a very specific ending. I already said what it was, but I won't explain it because if you're listening to this and you don't already know what I'm going for, you need to buy this game. If you want to wait till it's on sale, or if they put it on Game Pass or something, that's fine. But at some point in the next year, you need to play this series and play the Legendary Edition if you have a high respect PC or PS5 or Series X. But then came this moment when I finished it. I finished 3, and I put it off. Before I go into that, there's a DLC. There's multiple DLCs that are really, really good in 3 that really deepen the game a lot, and I really enjoyed. But there's a DLC. It was the last DLC they put out for 3. And it's called the Citadel DLC. The Citadel is kind of the home base through all 3 of these games for the galaxy. It's where everyone comes together. It's this big giant ancient space station that everyone uses, and it's like this, it's the main hub for everything, right? So there's this DLC, and what's so funny about it is I didn't even realize it was a DLC when I was playing through the game. But essentially a character gives you an apartment, and that kicks off the DLC. So just in case you're curious, because I didn't know this, but you start getting into it, and what it turns into is this like action adventure, like buddy cop, like rom-com DLC that is the most fan servicey thing I've ever seen in my entire history of media consumption. It calls back to things from the first and second game. It's really funny. doesn't take itself seriously for the most part. It gives you tons of opportunities to get to know and to get deeper with the characters, and especially the character that you're romancing in the game. This Tally character, there's a specific scene that happens where there's a big party, everyone's getting drunk on the crew, and you walk past the bathroom and you're able to talk to the bathroom door, and you're kind of like, well, that's weird. And if you do it, you walk in there and this Tally character is hammered, and every time you speak to her, you can keep doing it over and over. She just says more and more hilarious stuff. And you can do that with a bunch of the characters. And just the way that they built that up and the opportunities it gives you in that DLC to get one-on-one with all of the crew and to deepen their story, deepen their relationship with Shepard, the character you're playing as. It's so that Citadel DLC, every single fan of every single IP should be lucky enough to get a DLC like that. I mean, like I see this used a lot, and I often think it's kind of cringy, but it applies so well. The Citadel DLC for Mass Effect as a series is like the sweetest love letter I've ever seen from a developer to its players. Like I can't even put together what an equivalent DLC for a game like The Division would be. I don't even know. I can't even. I'm not creative enough to think about or to put together ideas for someone who's a Division fan but never played Mass Effect. I don't even know how to explain it, because, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, I don't think that an Ubisoft dev would ever do a DLC like this. I honestly, unfortunately, don't believe an Ubisoft dev, or really any devs other than BioWare at the time, can even do 3 games like this or to build a world like this. Just my opinion. I know there's people who disagree. That's fine. Assassin's Creed is not it. I'm sorry. That is a hill I will die on. Is that Assassin's Creed has tried to become what these Mass Effect games were 9 to 14 years ago, and it just pales in comparison. Odyssey is the closest they got, but it's just not there. It's not there. But then Mass Effect 3 ends. That Citadel DLC was great. The ending is heart-wrenching, and it's so good. And the thing is here, to be straight up, the gameplay still isn't like amazing. It's the environments you go into, it's the story you uncover. There's this thing called the Leviathan that if you play this, you need to explore it because it's super cool. And honestly, like the final mission, the gameplay isn't great. It's very samey. You go to places, you kill a bunch of waves of enemies, and then you move on to the next place. But that's not what it's about. That's not what's so exciting and fun about this game. It's that moment I told you about, I have a home, come back to me. Like, if you haven't played, or if you haven't, gone down the path I went down, that will mean nothing to you. But if you have, and you hear those words, I guarantee at least one person who listens to this is going to click on YouTube, type in Tally Shep ending, and watch that scene again, and maybe even get a little teary-eyed because it's so good. And it's because of the work they put in before that. Unfortunately, the bad side of finishing 3 for me was I have this tendency that when I get really, really into a TV show or even a movie, not as often, or a video game that like really pulls at my heartstrings, there's this like short term and very first world problem-y like depression that you fall into. You have that like empty feeling of like, oh, I wish there was more. You have that feeling of like, and the thing is, through the 3 games, they tell a complete story, at least in my opinion. Like, while I would always ask for more, especially with the relationship stuff, it'd be fun to see more. You will always want more. And, it's just not possible. There's not enough hours in the day for them to make enough content to satisfy you eternally. And sometimes less is more. But like, every time I finish something, like a show called Superstore ended earlier this year, and like when I finished it, I felt there's just this awful feeling. But it's also a really good feeling because it means that, one, you were able to let yourself get lost and connect in this world that isn't your own, that isn't real, that some people would see as silly, but that you let yourself get into it and get lost in it and truly enjoy something. And that's really cool. And it also means that these hundreds of people who spent hundreds and thousands of hours grinding away at this thing 14 plus years ago are still, being remembered. Their work is being loved and experienced by you, and that it like literally meant something to you, which is so cool. Like, I could only hope to ever do anything one day that stands the test of time, or that impacts people or makes people feel the way that like Mass Effect 1 through 3 did, or your game of choice, or your TV show of choice, or your movie of choice. And I think that's what's so interesting about like game development and anything that's like artistic like that, that like you can evoke emotion from nothing. Like when my daughter was born, that was obviously a very emotional moment. When I, got married to my wife, or when we have shared moments that were really special to us, or even in my, as I was younger, special things that happened. When you can bring emotions like that to someone from a book you wrote, or a TV show that you were in or made, or a game that you made, like that's really special. Like that's really, really cool. And beyond that, now being part of this community who has experienced this, and now like I get it. Again, going back, now I understand why people were so upset about Anthem and Andromeda, because they had this expectation. They all the people who those years ago played Mass Effect 1 through 3 and who have played it again 10, 15, 20 times, and that's they want that experience again. They want that high again, right? And then you get Anthem that like almost had no story, and definitely not the connections and the choices and the impact. And I mean, not even close. A lot of people will stick up for Anthem's gameplay. I get it. I have no doubt in my mind that the combat is great. But that's literally the opposite of what Mass Effect was. The combat in Mass Effect is okay. I actually prefer 2 the most. There's a semi-auto assault rifle that if you upgrade it enough and yourself enough, you can like one tap people in the head through like even through the end. It's glorious. But even then, like it still wasn't the strongest part of the game. Where like a game like Anthem and arguably Andromeda, the combat actually is the best part, and that sucks because that's not what you want from a BioWare game, or at least that's not what I want. And it doesn't seem like that's what people wanted. They didn't care if the combat was the best combat. They wanted to feel entrenched in a world, and especially with Andromeda, they were hoping to. They made it very clear Andromeda took place hundreds of years after the Mass Effect trilogy. That it took place in a whole different galaxy. Like they tried to distance it, but then the problem is that, well, I'll get into it. So I'm playing Andromeda. I tried to play it before the Legendary Edition came out. I played it for like a couple hours and I was like, no, I don't get it. I don't care about this world. I don't care about this IP. I am not invested in this at all. I knew there was callbacks happening to the trilogy, but I didn't get them at the time. I just didn't give a shit. And then last night, I actually jumped back into Andromeda. And so here's the thing. It's not very good. It's fine though. It's okay compared to 1, 2, and 3. It's just not even close. But on its own, it's okay, especially after they fixed it. Now, unfortunately, if you don't know about Andromeda, it's the 4th game in the series. Kind of, it's really more of a spin-off game, but it's still part of the mainline story ish. And what happened with it, at least from what I remember, is that it basically got handled by not the A team at BioWare. And it's been panned pretty badly for not even for just letting down completely. So what I'll say after playing the 3 games, I'm maybe 5 or 6 hours into Andromeda. I'm mostly focusing on the main story. What's really funny is that if you look at Andromeda, and if you look at like its foundation, its base, it's everything that you could have wanted the next gen quote unquote Mass Effect to be. The way that the game plays. Now they went open world, which is probably the most controversial thing. I'm definitely mixed on it. It's fine. it's just Mass Effect, the trilogy is not open world besides the silly stuff in Mass Effect 1 that's awful. It's very linear, but it doesn't feel like it. It takes these like linear missions and areas and makes them feel open world, as opposed to Andromeda is open world, but it doesn't feel good. It's very empty. So it's kind of that less is more thing I talked about, where like the Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 did a really good job of taking these very linear missions in these very compact areas and making them feel really big and making them feel like you could go do other stuff in them, even though you actually can't, but you don't want to, because what you're doing, what you're there for, is so good and it's so important and it moves the story, which is what you want. It's Andromeda is interesting because, like I was saying, you can see there's a bunch of stuff that's better than 1, 2, and 3. There's a bunch of stuff like I really like the Nexus is the hub in this game, where the capital was in the trilogy. And the way it's laid out and the way that you can explore it, in my opinion, is like so superior to the first 3 games, and it feels big. In Mass Effect 1, they made this hub. Actually, it was huge and it was sprawling, but it's so basic and bare and just ugly. It's awful. And then in 2 and 3, they made it way more compact. It looks a lot better, but it's like so small though. A bunch of the areas are. And in Andromeda, it looks great. Now, part of the problem with Andromeda is on Xbox, they stopped development. So they didn't do any of the DLCs. Apparently there were 3 games planned. There was going to be Andromeda and then 2 more games. There was going to be DLCs for all of them that were going to expand the story and stuff, which means they also haven't even done like a next gen version. There, even for the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, there's not a 60 FPS patch, and you can tell the legendary edition is 4K 60 FPS on the Series X, which is what I played it on. And then you go to Andromeda, which came out years after the original trilogy, and it's 30 FPS and it looks rough. It does not look good. It is an ugly game. It's not. It's rough, and it's one of those things where if it got a 4K patch and 60 FPS boost, and it would play a lot better. It would still be pretty ugly. If you don't remember when Andromeda came out, the animations on the faces, the character models in general, just the animations of their movement, it all looked awful. It doesn't look a lot better. They fixed a lot of stuff. A lot of the bugs do seem to basically be gone. I have caught my character randomly T-posing at times, which is just kind of makes you shake your head a little bit, but what I'm figuring out about Andromeda, and obviously during another podcast, once I finished it, I'll talk more about it, is Andromeda isn't a bad game. Andromeda kind of reminds me of like Ghost Recon Wildlands, and especially Breakpoint. If those games didn't have the Ghost Recon tag on them, which is a game that I basically look back to Future Soldier as the last good one. If Wildlands and Breakpoint were another IP, I would probably like them a lot more, because I don't expect what I expect from a new IP that I would from Ghost Recon, right? It feels like Andromeda is kind of the same thing with Mass Effect. If Andromeda was a whole new universe and a whole new IP, it still is pretty rough, but it would be seen as like an okay game that's similar to Mass Effect. But the fact that it was a Mass Effect game, the fact that it came out years after the 3rd game, which is a pinnacle for a lot of people, and it's just okay. The characters aren't that interesting. So you're in a whole new universe. So you would think that all of the aliens would be different. Well, they're not. Most of them are the same because you brought them with you from the Milky Way or the galaxy, Andromeda, to a new galaxy. And in the 2 new races that you run into, the one, they look like cat people and they look terrible. They're so bad, especially because the alien designs in the original trilogy are great. They're so unique, and they're all bipedal. Like, for the most part, all the ones you interact with are like humanoid, but they they're very distinct, and they're very like cool and kind of real looking. Even their gait and their animations and stuff, like they look like they could be real. Where one of the new races, the antagonist in Andromeda, just look basically like a ripoff of the antagonists from the trilogy. And then the new allied race just looks hilarious. Like they look like a Star Wars animated cartoon character, but they're around all of these realistic environments and realistic humanoid characters. They're these big, like doe-eyed, like they just look weird. It's bizarre. It's bizarre that someone signed off on it, because like I would have rather have had like a slightly modified existing alien race from the trilogy be these people instead of what they did. I'm getting over it at this point. I'm able to, like, after playing a few hours, I can kind of ignore how insane they look. But yeah, Andromeda is definitely that same thing as kind of like Breakpoint to me for Ghost Recon, where it's like, if you look at it completely on its own, it's okay. If you look at it compared to what was before, it's rough, despite the fact that you can see that there was a bunch of stuff, a bunch of like quality of life stuff that they really did improve on, and it's really good. And you can tell that if it was running at 60 FPS, and if they had more, better models and animations, if the story was more interesting, and if they had better voice actors, if you did all of those things, which is no small feat, it would be a much better game. And that's why I have hope for Mass Effect 4. And this is where I'll kind of start to wrap things up. So Mass Effect 4 basically got teased. I don't know if it's been technically announced, but last year, I think it was at the Game Awards, BioWare put out a trailer that is definitely for a Mass Effect game. It says, I think it was Mass Effect will continue at the end of the trailer. And what was exciting about it is that it suggests that we're going back to the Milky Way. There are some people who think Andromeda may still be involved. There may be kind of an intertwining story there. We'll have to see. But the trailer, not very vaguely, shows that the ending I was going for is the ending, and it's the reason I went for that ending, should be the canon ending. There's a character from the original trilogy that is shown in this trailer in the middle of it and at the end, and she's uncovering armor from another character from the main game. And I'll kind of leave it somewhat mysterious. I don't want to ruin it for people who haven't played the trilogy yet. But play the trilogy and then go watch the trailer for Mass Effect 4 again, because I've got some ideas. I've got some conspiracies. But what I'm most excited about is that part of the issue with Andromeda is it was the first Mass Effect game they put onto the Frostbite engine, which is the one that Battlefield uses and that EA has basically forced all their studios to use. Andromeda was the first one on that engine, and apparently a lot of games, including Anthem, Dragon Age, and now Mass Effect, have all had a lot of issues trying to use Frostbite, because Frostbite was very much designed as a Battlefield engine, and so they've tried to use it in other games and with some mixed success. And supposedly a big part of the issue with Andromeda was that they just had to make tools from scratch to make Frostbite work for their game. And what I have hope for is that the direction it seems like they tried to go with Andromeda but failed is good. Like I said before, there's a lot of stuff about Andromeda that you're like, oh, they knew people didn't like that in the trilogy, so they fixed it here. Even the conversation systems and stuff like that, like there's a bunch of stuff that feels better. Because by Mass Effect 3, it was still a 360 game. And so there's a bunch of stuff like the ship that you are in command of is like shrunk down so much from the first game, even though it's actually a bigger ship in the lore. Because you could tell that the 360, they were just tapping it out. They were using every bit of power it had left. Where Andromeda, like, your ship is like this big, giant, gorgeous thing. Like it's in Andromeda, the environments and especially space are gorgeous, so pretty. And so my hope is that the lessons they learned from the trilogy and making the Legendary Edition, the lessons they learned from Andromeda and from Dragon Age and the other game, Anthem especially, hopefully a lot of that quality of life stuff they've continued to improve for Mass Effect 4, and then they actually follow through with the story, with the characters, with, you know, those things that were missing from Anthem and Andromeda. So I have hope. I think maybe on the next podcast I'll do kind of a spoiler cast, and talk about the ending of the trilogy. I assume I'll be able to talk about the ending of Andromeda by then, and then some speculation for Mass Effect 4. No, I don't anticipate the Echo Cast turning into a Mass Effect podcast, but it's definitely a thing I would like to talk about more. And if a Mass Effect 4, the impression I'm getting from what I'm reading is that 4 probably isn't coming for 3 or 4 more years. They just put out the Legendary Edition. I believe the next Dragon Age is supposed to be the next game they're going to put out. So I would imagine that their A team is on that right now, and that they, you know, after that gets put out, they'll move a lot of those people over to work on Mass Effect 4, and then they'll start hyping that up, I'm sure. So now I have to wait. I do plan to finish Andromeda. Kind of suffering through it, but I'll finish it. It's fine. I just don't want to do all the side stuff because it's extremely repetitive. It's very Assassin's Creed open world-y, and I'm done with that kind of stuff. I'm done with that type of game. So so there's my TED talk about Mass Effect. Like I said, I think maybe next week or next time I record, I'll do kind of a spoiler cast for Mass Effect for people who did play it or play it before then. I suspect it'll be about a week and a half or 2 weeks before I record again, unless some big Division news drops. I'm not expecting that until E3. If they do drop anything, that's when I think it'll come. So maybe I'll do like a pre-E3 prediction podcast and then another one afterwards. But yeah, Mass Effect, if you haven't played Legendary Edition, if you haven't played the series at all, you absolutely need to. If you played the original trilogy and enjoyed it, but haven't played it because it's so outdated, check out Legendary Edition. I was extremely impressed. It definitely feels old, but especially 2 and 3. 1 is fine. 2 and 3 feel good, even if they definitely feel dated. And yeah, I'm pretty sure it's my favorite IP now. I kind of want to sit on that and maybe look at it again. And like, the final thought I'll leave with here is that I want to replay 2 and 3 and make choices that I didn't get to make choices maybe that I think are more canon, or that, like in 3, I ended up like 400 points short of the perfect ending, which you can look up yourself or just play it. But you need to reach a score of 5,000 for this total military strength thing to get the perfect ending that I was going for, and I missed it. So I didn't get the ending I want. So I plan on doing that again. The only thing is that I want to play this again, but I need to take some time because you can only experience all of this stuff once. I know if I play 2 and 3 again, Mass Effect, I'll experience things I didn't the first time if I make different choices. There were some missions I know I missed that I won't miss this time. But you can never get that first time back. So that's why I didn't stream this playthrough. I just played it and enjoyed it. Because now I know when I go back, it'll still be cool and I can still get into it, but it's never going to be the same as that first time you played through it, you know? So if you haven't played it, please get in there, enjoy it. Use guides or don't, up to you. I personally did. I thought it improved my experience because there's a few things that can happen if you don't use a guide that may have ruined the experience for me, because it would have done things to characters I really enjoyed. So I'll leave you with that. I'm not going to do listener questions this time. There were some questions from Vern Dog on Reddit. I'll cover those in the next podcast. That will be hopefully more Division oriented. Maybe we'll see. On that note, I am Bon Diesel on Twitch, where I do try to stream here and there. You can check me out on Twitter at Bon Diesel or at the EchoCast. I am finishing up a giveaway for some Audio Technica headphones. So if you check out my Twitter at Bon Diesel, you can find the link to enter into that in the next few days. If you want some EchoCast or Bon Diesel merch, check out streamlabs.com/Bon Diesel. That's all I have. So until next time.